Hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining me on my presentation today, the first one I've ever done at London's Calling. I hope you're all keeping safe at home and enjoying the day so far. Today I'm talking to you about the Certified Technical Architect exam. If I could do it all again, and sharing all my lessons from my first attempt at the CTA review board. My name is Gemma Blizzard and I am a Salesforce MVP and honoured to have been renewed this year. And I'm also the founder of Ladies Be Architects and the Architect Club. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about my career journey. Those of you who know me know that I have been working with Salesforce since 2008, and it's very much a passion of mine. The lines are fairly blurred between hobby and job in terms of Salesforce. I am one of those fortunate people who can say that they do their hobby for a living. I started off with a background in IT. I did a business information systems degree at a local university. And after I decided to leave my local area and go down south, I was fortunate enough to be given a job to look after Salesforce as an administrator. And it really went kind of uphill or downhill from there, really. I really enjoyed being an admin. It was great having the opportunity to learn about Salesforce. And I really loved the fact that it wasn't installed on people's machines. I was quite inspired by that, and I really bought into the values of Salesforce and the ethos of Salesforce as a company. So in 2009, I decided to go consulting, and I carried on doing that right the way through, actually. And I have actually worked for consulting partners before. I've worked for myself, and I've worked for an ISV. So I worked for Financial Force for 3.5 years. In 2017, I joined Blue Wolf as a solution architect. And from there, my career went from strength to strength as I started to really invest the time to learn about the architect role and start to ramp up and think about how I was going to build on my credentials going forward. So I kind of went in about 10, 12 years, I went from being a spreadsheet monkey in sales ops with a technical background and education into a fully fledged solution architect who was attempting, and last year I attempted my CTA exam for the first time. Before I go into the experience of the CTA, I just want to pay a little bit of attention to what I think an architect really is. A Salesforce architect is somebody who leads a delivery work stream. They have to be creative. They have to be able to solve problems with a well-rounded understanding of the business challenges, the technical challenges, any other constraints around data and security. But also they have to be innovative, because without innovation, it's really hard to actually build a solution that is, one, performant, but second, will scale to other departments and functions. So when you're designing solutions as an architect, you need to be able to see the bigger picture and always consider that that bigger picture might change. So you are always learning. You are also coaching other people and leading the designs of those solutions. And when those solutions go wrong, or perhaps requirements change, priorities change, you need to be in a position to respond quite quickly to solve the problem and to fix any other issues that may have come across. So in a nutshell, as a Salesforce architect, and certainly as a technical architect, you have the elements of the platform around application design, custom code, sharing, visibility, identity, integration, mobile applications, community interactions, volumes of data, and you have to balance that platform technical knowledge with leadership skills. And when I say leadership skills, I mean the ability to have sometimes potentially different conversations with different amounts of people, with different types of people. The way you communicate with a C-suite stakeholder might be different to the way that you communicate with perhaps an offshore developer or an onshore developer or a consultant. So stakeholder management is absolutely key, as well as knowledge and experience around how to set Salesforce up for success, how to optimize the quality of data and ensure that there's a good framework for supporting the ongoing success of that data and the relevance and the accuracy of that data, but also around the governance of the system itself, making sure that you have the right teams in place to look after the system going forward, and that that team is enabled to make the right decisions in an informed way. So in a nutshell, that's what the technical architect certification is looking to assess, not just your platform knowledge, but how you apply it and how you apply the governance techniques and the business techniques that you need in order to make a Salesforce system effective. In terms of the certification, this is the architect pyramid, and there's Ruth, who represents architects. And as you can see, there are almost two pillars. One pillar of the triangle represents the more functional side, so the application architect side. And the idea is if you are looking to progress into becoming a technical architect, you start working on your certified administrator exam, then start looking at your at the certifications under the specialization category. So that, for example, data architecture, sharing and visibility, identity, integration, and development lifecycle. These are all very specialist exams. And in order to become an application architect, for example, on the domain level, you have to have achieved all of the certifications on the left-hand side of the pyramid. Once you have achieved all of those, on your last exam, when you pass your last exam under that side of the pyramid, you will automatically be awarded the application architect. And the same for the system architect on the other side. Once you have achieved both the application architect and system architect, then effectively that makes you eligible to apply to go to the review board. The Certified Technical Architect exam is comprised of a panel. It is a practical exam, so it's not a multiple choice where you sit in front of your computer and answer questions, but it is effectively a panel of your peers, who are certified technical architects themselves. More often than not, they work for Salesforce, and their job is to assess how you solve a particular scenario with all of the elements around data sharing, platform capability, identity, integration, all of that knowledge being applied to that scenario. So I'm going to share my story with you now. What actually inspired me to do the CTA? A couple of years ago, if you'd said to me I'll do this, that I would be working towards the CTA, I would have probably just laughed at you. I had no intention of doing the CTA until I came to Blue Wolf and I hit the bench, actually. Those of you who don't work for consulting firms, the bench is effectively where you end up when you are waiting for billable work. It also presents a fantastic opportunity for you to rest if you have been working on a long-term project and it's very full on, but it's also a great opportunity to work on your certifications and building up some credentials. And by the time I joined Blue Wolf, I had 5 certifications that I had been building up over several years. And during my time at Financial Force, Salesforce had released all of these designer exams and I hadn't started working on them yet. So I decided to just pick a couple of exams that I knew I'd be comfortable with, like the data and the sharing exams. And I had a really great mentor. My old manager, Andrew, who I'm pictured with in the middle, he is a certified technical architect, and he was effectively leading the technical and solution architect function at Blue Wolf. And he encouraged me, actually, not by doing very much, he just gave me the permission to start thinking about how I could put some credentials around me. And he saw some potential in me around the CTA. When he first said, I think you could look at the CTA, I said, no. Why don't I just get to application architect first and see where that takes me? And the next day, when I came in to speak to him, I had changed my mind. I thought, yeah, okay, CTA could happen, but just not yet. At that time, I decided to start an online study group, and I found Charlie, my friend who I'm pictured with on the right. She is now my co-leader for Ladies Be Architects, and Ladies Be Architects was born out the idea of finding friends to journey along with. So moving to the review board, I would say the review board is less like this, and the experience is more like this. You have to prepare a series of artifacts and you are given a scenario, and that scenario is effectively giving you an idea of a fictional business and some quite fundamental technological and business challenges around that scenario. So this is an example scenario that we built as part of Ladies Be Architects to allow people to practice their presentations, because once you have been given that scenario, you are given a couple of hours to read it and to prepare a series of artifacts. You are then given 45 minutes to present your solution and the artifacts that you have created to prop up your solution and justify your solution. You have to go to the right level of detail, and but you also cannot run over on time. You have to cover every requirement that's given to you in that scenario and make sure every single one is addressed and justified. Here's an example of some artifacts that I have started. When I started the ramp up, I was given a couple of scenarios, and I would actually present them to my mentor, Andrew, and he would watch me do the presentation and then give me the Q&A experience afterwards. So that's the second part of that review board exam. The first part, you've got three parts really. First part is the prep, second part is the presentation, third part is the Q&A. And the typical types of examples of artifacts that you might prepare might be a role hierarchy, actors and licenses, a system landscape diagram, as you can see on the right hand corner, and a data model. And preparing these artifacts and making sure that I practiced them in mock exams was a fundamental part of how I prepared. I did about 20 mocks in total. And by the time that I started my preparation in earnest and attended the CTA 601 course, which is a course offered by Salesforce, I had actually completed about 10 or 12 of them by that point. And it was really refreshing to receive some top tips from another CTA. I was actually interviewed. I actually did my scenarios with probably about 2 or 3 CTAs in the end, and they all had different elements of feedback to give me, which was incredibly valuable. So the CTA 601 course was 2 days of going through tips and tricks for the review board and just educating us about the level of detail that we needed to go to. But the challenge was obviously there is a cost attached to it. So justifying that cost is a consideration for all of us. It's a fairly large group, so there was little opportunity to practice one-to-one, but we did get to practice presenting in small bite-sized chunks, and it just helped to educate us all on what to expect. In terms of other preparation tactics I employed, I reserved 1 day a week for mock exams. That gave me the ability to practice. However, as a consultant, it did mean that I couldn't really get involved in heavy billable work. There were some resourcing challenges because clients don't want to be told that they can only have someone for 4 days a week. So my utilization did suffer, and that meant that I had no bonus that year, and I was not eligible for promotion as a result. So that's something just to consider if you work for a systems integrator that has those targets. What I did this time, which worked quite well, was recording mock exams and sharing them online, because I was able to invite other experienced practitioners to come on board and come along, watch the presentation and ask questions. And it meant I was able to show others how I solved and presented the business problem. So effectively serving and giving back to the community, because there's not much out there in terms of in terms of guided resources for the review board itself. So, and there is no right answer, but what I wanted to do was just show how I was doing it. And I worked with a friend who was doing exactly the same thing. The challenges around that is that some of our judges who joined us from the community were not necessarily familiar with the CTA formats. We did get some feedback around presentation style being too quick, but in terms of the review board, it's a very unique experience. It's not the sort of techniques that you would employ if you were doing a talk like this, for example, where you can kind of pace it and make sure you have pauses and help people, give people time to digest. You just have to get through it and make sure that you address all the requirements. Salesforce did ask me to take some of my mocks down in order to protect the IP of some of the practice scenarios. So we created a program that would enable people to write practice scenarios that could be distributed for Ladies Be Architects. We're still looking for volunteers, just saying. I mentioned my friend earlier, so I work with Matt Morris, who is one of the co-organisers of the London Admin User Group. He volunteered to be a judge and to ask questions, and it gave us a chance to see how others presented and solved as well, because in turn I got to watch him do his presentation. The challenges around that was actually in myself feeling like I knew a lot less than he did, and that brought a lot of feelings of vulnerability, self-doubt and stress, and I did put a lot of pressure on myself throughout this process, which led to a few meltdowns. A lot of times when I ended up sitting down just crying and saying, I don't think I can do this, this is too hard, who do I think I am attempting this, I don't code, and putting pressure on myself, because obviously leading in this space with Ladies Be Architects means people are watching, and if I don't pass this, how does that look? These are all battles that I was having with my own head the whole time. I did make a pledge. On the right hand side, you'll see the infographic I made myself. And actually, I found that even though it was setting goals and boundaries and gave me some structure, it did actually result in a lot of unnecessary pressure on myself. And there was some of these activities and pledges that actually didn't happen in the end. I didn't exercise, I didn't do mindfulness and relaxation. I was just scared, and I wanted to put as much effort into this as I could. During prep, Matt and I kept chatting over text, and we were clarifying ideas and topics. We were asking each other questions. We were checking in and encouraging one another. And it made all the difference, because I didn't feel like I was going through this alone. This is some of the revision that I was doing. I had a big whiteboard on the wall in the living room, where I would spend probably about half an hour a day. I'd do it once in the morning, do it again in the evening, to draw out OAuth flows so that I wouldn't forget them. If I add that prep to conversations with my mentors and with Matt, then those conversations actually helped me to feel ready. There was a big text chat that we were having about integration patterns, which was incredibly valuable and really stuck into my head. I talked about the meltdowns. I was absolutely, utterly convinced that I was going to fail. And I felt like it was almost taking over my life at that point. I took 3 weeks off before work. One week was spent doing mocks, and then 2 weeks was completely off, just revising, going over all of the exam content all over again, making sure that I knew it. I learn I revise by reading and writing, reading then writing, and drawing as well. But I tried to change my scenery as well. As you can see, I went to my local cafe to do some revision and do some trailhead on large data volumes, which was incredibly valuable. Soon the time came to do the CTA. So I booked a hotel in London for the night before, just to avoid any potential travel mishaps. I live about 50 miles north of London. It's always a risk. I stopped studying the day before. And then on the morning of the CTA, I had a good breakfast. I also decided that to give myself some strength and confidence, I picked an outfit. So I wore a sunflower dress to the exam. I was going to wear my sparkly cowboy boots, but really kind of chickened out at the end of that. But also, my friend sent me this TED talk by Brené Brown, where she talks about the power of vulnerability and courage. And I found that an incredible video to watch to help me with my confidence levels the night before. So here came the big day. As you can see, I look really, really excited. I was 30 minutes early for my exam, so I settled in with the big stuffed Astro in the atrium as I waited for my facilitator to come and get me. And when she took me up to the room, I was just thrilled to be there. Everything, like by the time I came to do the review board, I had been at it for about 18 months. And I was really desperate to get on with it. I had to stop halfway through for breast cancer treatment. So just to be there was an incredible moment for me. The proctor said that he'd never seen anyone so happy to be doing an exam. And I went in to complete the exam, did all the prep, took my artifacts in, and I'll be honest, it was kind of agony. It was difficult. It is a very tough exam, and I think I was just so excited and anxious about it that some of my artifacts, I wasn't doing the same thing that I was doing in my mocks, probably because I was so excited and the pressure was so high because it was the actual exam. When I came out, my brain just started whirring with all the errors that I was certain I had made. Even though it was all done, there was nothing more I could do, but that didn't let up for 2 weeks. And I'm really not a patient person. So waiting for the results was absolute agony, and I wound myself up. And by the time the results came, I was absolutely convinced I'd failed. I knew exactly what I had done to cause a fail. I had studied so hard that when it came to do the exam, I saw this 9-page scenario and thought, oh my God, how am I going to get through this in all this time? And it turns out I think I had studied too hard. So it turned out I was absolutely right. In my panic about having enough time to prepare, I hadn't read the scenario closely enough. And I had made such a bad decision about my org strategy that we lost time to address other topics elsewhere in the Q&A. I wasn't even close to passing. And the funny thing is that the two sections I did pass were the two areas I had been most concerned about during my prep. And the areas I failed on were areas that I was actually passing consistently on during my mocks. When I first got the results, I did actually burst into tears. And because for me, psychologically, it confirmed that I had been beating myself up for good reason. Nobody likes that. And as the weeks went on and I processed the feedback, all the effort I spent preparing, it felt completely pointless. I was licking my wounds for a good couple of months after this exam result came through, because I felt I'd been useless to my employer. I've worked so hard on this and I hadn't been chargeable to customers, I hadn't been delivering, and I had absolutely nothing to show for all of that time that I had spent preparing. And sure enough, despite passing the promotions board at work, I was passed over for promotion because my utilization was poor. So that was another kick for me. Someone made a comment that I was a great advocate, but didn't have the breadth of knowledge to pass the CTA. That got back to me and it just completely deflated me, and I felt like jacking it all in. But then when people said, how did you get on? It was very easy for me to say, oh, I've failed, never mind, I've learned, I'll have another go later on in the year. And then I tried to convince myself that I really was okay about it, but I was not. I was just so hacked off. It took a while for me to get over that failure because I've been working so hard and I've been advocating the exam publicly as well. So I thought, what would people think? Would they be smug? Because by failing that and being a declarative clicker, I'd proven that only coders can be CTAs? Or is it because I'd stuck my head above the parapet and then I'd failed? And as usual, my worst enemy was myself. It took me about 2 months to gather the courage to make peace with it. And when I look back on why I think I failed, I mentioned earlier that I think I studied too hard and overthought it, but also I changed my tactics on the day. I didn't make the most of my prep time. I spent so much time reading that I grew worried about having enough time to make artifacts. So I didn't read the scenario closely enough and I got too excited. My whole body was shaking in the exam and I was not concise enough because of my nerves. And when I look back now, compare how I was last year to how I am now, my mental state was not at its strongest back then. This year, I have been working very hard on my mental health, and I actually feel like I could do this now, especially now that I've given myself the time and space to think about it. I've been through the experience once, but also I have prioritized my own mental health. And if I look back now, I actually wish I had put it off another year. Because I would, and because I'm not in any rush to become a CTA. I want to become a CTA when I'm ready. And I feel more ready this year in my whole soul than perhaps I was last year. So lessons, what lessons can I give you to take forward when you want to go and do your CTAs? First of all, it's worth investing the money to go on the CTA 601 course. Make sure that you do that before you even start. If you can afford and you're prepared to invest further, then have a word with Flow Republic. They offer a CTA coaching course, and I have seen several candidates, including our latest lady, who has passed the CTA. She has made use of Flow Republic to help her, and the MVP community to help her prepare. Change your attitude. It's really easy for some people who are academic to just go through the designer exams, ticking them off and going, right, I've passed that now. Yay, I'm certified in this and that and the other, that'll get me the job. But if you go through the designer exams with the review board as your end game, that will encourage you to absorb the information and practice applying it more readily. Even better, if you can arrange your certifications around your practical experience, maybe go through the experience of working with large data volumes and then do your data architecture certification. That will contextualize and really crystallize that knowledge in your head, ready for the review board. Don't assume that because you have both domain certifications that you're automatically ready for the review board. How many of you log into LinkedIn and see a big certification post that says, yay, I'm double domain certified. That's it, one more to go until I'm ready for the review board. The process of getting ready for the review board is a ramp up in itself. Just getting to the domain level is about 60% of the way there to the CTA. You need to work for another 40% in order to become ready for that review board panel. Do as many mock exams as you can. It's worth practicing. And on the Ladies Be Architects website, so ladies-be-architects.com, we have a couple of mock scenarios that you can practice with. We are trying to build a bank of more scenarios. So think about RFPs you've worked on, think about projects you've worked on, and consider how you could create a scenario for your friends and colleagues and fellow community members to practice with. And finally, make sure your head is in a good place. If your head's not in a good place, there's a big risk that on the day you'll crumble like I did. There's no rush to getting a CTA. The CTA is still going to be there. And I know it's easy for all of us to watch all the acquisitions taking place and think, my goodness, how am I going to keep up with this, with all this stuff that's coming out? And actually, the CTA review board, you have to solve your solutions to the best of your knowledge and your experience. And if you justify it well enough, the judges will take that on board. There's no right answer. And there are some situations where you might actually present a solution to the review board that maybe the CTAs on the board wouldn't do themselves, but if you've justified it well enough and they can see that it would solve the scenario, you're fine. The same applies to real life as well. Try to think of the pros and the cons and the considerations for each problem that you try to solve, and you're already thinking in the right way to pass and prepare for the review board. So what did I learn from this experience personally? This tweet was something that I noticed while I was sat beating myself up about the whole experience one day. and writing about it on my blog. And it really resonated with me because Vala said, as I look back on my life, I realized that every time I thought I was being rejected from something good, I was actually being redirected to something better. That's important to me because my head was already in the space of my future employment, and I considered that the experience of running my own business might actually help me to work on the gaps in my um, ability for the review board. So it would help me to become more concise. It would help me to potentially be exposed to more very senior C-suite level individuals. That would mean I have to be concise and I have to respond in a certain way and really step up my communication skills. But also would help me to manage my nerves. I feel that every year as I get older, my skin gets thicker, and I become much more able and more confident in dealing with these things. So, and the Architect Club is something that's going to really help me with that. So finally, if I could do it all again, after all, that's the big name of the title of this presentation. When I tried to think about that in more detail, I thought, well, of course, I'm going to do it again. I can do it again. Certainly, now that I'm healed and feeling better in my heart and my soul, and in my employment, so there's less pressure on me in my employment, or rather a different kind of pressure on me for my employment. I feel like I'm in a much better position to attempt the review board again. So thank you very much for listening. Very happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.